Hopefully what we're bringing today will be new information from insiders. That's why we have a really special first guest here. There's no one more inside than Richard Doty, ladies and gentlemen.
I was a counterintelligence officer for the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. I tried to keep the programs secret. If a person saw a classified aircraft in and around Area 51, it was our job to convince that person that what you saw was maybe a UFO.
You find many controversial introductions about Richard on the internet, but I'll just use the one that George Knapp wrote. Richard Doty is one of the most controversial figures in the history of ufology. Doty had a 20-year career with the Air Force, including years as a special agent for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, the AFOSI. During that time, he was assigned to conduct surveillance on a scientist, Paul Bennewitz, who inadvertently acquired information about a classified Air Force program. Doty admits he fed disinformation to Bennewitz and to other UFOs investigators, forged documents, muddied the waters. But since leaving the military, Doty has also worked as a military police, and he is probably still very controversial. Thanks for being here, Richard. I know people have said a lot of things about you, but I want to hear the truth. I mean, you're no longer working for the Air Force Intelligence, right? But
that's right. That's right. I don't work for Air Force Intelligence. Intelligence.
Well, don't be offended by this question, but how do we know you're still not working for them and you're just saying you're not working for them?
Well, there's a lot of controversy over that, but number one, I wouldn't have any reason to. I left the agency, left the intelligence agency back in 1988. Although people bring up the fact that I was brought back to active service in 91 and 93, but that had nothing to do with UFOs or disinformation. It had to do with what I did in Europe after the wall fell. So I work as a private investigator. I have no connections, official connections with the United States government or intelligence community. I do have a lot of friends that still work within the intelligence community, and they feed me a lot of information that I share with you. I mean, I shared it with you at the UFO MegaCon and with others. So no, I don't work for any intelligence agency.
Okay, but when you were working for one, what were, because there's still not clear, because you've been so controversial, what exactly your job was working for these agencies, and especially in terms of UFO contact and all that.
Well, I worked in counterintelligence. I was a counterintelligence officer, and my job was to conduct counterintelligence operations. And most of those counterintelligence operations dealt with the protection of highly classified projects that the Air Force or other government agencies were working on. And if somebody strayed into one of those programs, it was my job to stray them out. And how we did that was we used disinformation, although we didn't call it disinformation. It was counterintelligence or deceptive operations, where we tried to stray them away from the classified projects and protect protect that project. And that's what I did.
The projects weren't just UFO related; they were other military, weapons sort of projects, right?
Right. For instance, the Paul Bennewitz case, he strayed upon a highly classified drone project that was occurring at Kirtland Air Force Base. Back in the early 80s, drones were very, very classified, highly classified, very sensitive to the government because they were controlled by an airplane. They were launched from another bigger airplane, and these drones would be flying around this controlling airplane. And people would see that and think that this drone was in fact a UFO trying to attack or menace the bigger plane.
Right.
And Paul Bennewitz straight into that, and it was my job to protect that highly classified project.
So was your job wasn't to just disinformation UFO investigators? It was really to keep people away from all these secret projects, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
but- yeah.
Unfortunately, just the way the things worked for me, most of the projects I worked on had something to do with UFOs or ET contacts.
Can you explain what happened with Paul Bennewitz? They said that he was led to believe that he was looking at UFOs, but
I did a presentation a couple of years ago at the UFO convention on this, where I laid everything out, including witnesses. Paul first of all, Paul Bennewitz was a scientist. He was a physicist. He owned a laboratory right outside Kirtland Air Force Base called Thunder Scientific Laboratory. He had a government contract. He made small sensors for submarines. And Paul was a member of MUFON, APRO. He was a field investigator for MUFON. He was a believer in UFOs and ETs. When he photographed these objects and some of the other things that he did, collected signal intelligence from the base, and we learned about it, and he actually called us. When I went to him, I gathered all the information. I went back and I wrote up a report and I sent it to headquarters, and the headquarters advised me to protect that project or those projects, because he actually strayed upon 2 classified projects. Protect those projects at all means. And one of the things that I was supposed to do is convince him that what he was seeing was UFOs and not the classified drones. Well,
Right.
You got to understand that Paul Bennewitz was already a believer in UFOs. He
Right.
was already an investigator from MUFON. So when I went to him and I said simply, Paul, don't you think that what you photographed was UFOs, extraterrestrial? He said, I know they are. That's all it took. I didn't feed him disinformation. I didn't drug him.
Right.
I didn't psychologically plant something in his mind. All I had to do was agree with him, and that's all it took.
That's all it took for what exactly?
For him to think that what he was seeing was UFOs,
But
and
he
not
also-
classified drones.
So yeah, but he was led to believe that, because you wanted to keep him away from what it really was. But didn't he have sort of a breakdown because of that way of thinking?
Well, no, there were a lot of other factors involved in that breakdown.
Okay, I just curious. I mean, what was going on? He had a mental breakdown because he thought he was seeing UFOs. This is what the story is, right?
Well, there were a lot of other factors and players involved in this. Bill Moore, Alan Hynek.
Alan Hynek too?
Alan Hynek, Leonard Stringfield. These people interfered with the investigation. They contacted Paul, and Alan Hynek gave Paul a monitor, a computer monitor, and unbeknownst to us, although Paul later told us that, hey, Alan Hynek gave me this monitor and I'm supposed to use this monitor. Well, it comes to, we don't have time enough to go.
We don't have to go through the whole
details on any
thing.
of
I'm
this.
just wondering what happened though. Yeah, go ahead.
But there were things happening in Paul's life that we later determined wasn't coming from us or wasn't coming from U.S. intelligence. We didn't know where it was coming from, such as the orb incident that happened in his house, where an orb was flying around his house. Some of the things that he was seeing on the monitor that Hynek gave him, all those things added up, and so Paul went to, he had a psychological episode. He had two of them. The first one wasn't as bad as the second one. The first one, his family convinced him to see a psychiatrist. He did. He was admitted in the hospital for, I think, 4 or 5 days. And I visited him at the hospital. He got out of the hospital. I visited him at his office.
But did you visit him as a friend or as someone concerned or as part of the intelligence?
No, I visited him as a friend. I became a good friend with Paul.
Oh,
a really,
okay.
really good friend with him.
Okay.
And I just, I was trying to convince Paul at that time, and this was after the operation was all over with. I mean, the project was over with. This was in, I think, 87. I tried to convince Paul that what he saw was in fact something military. He wouldn't believe me. He was convinced it was UFOs. And then the latter psychological case was well later. It was 89, 90 timeframe, when he had problems in his business. He had a business and he lost a government contract, and he had a lot of financial problems.
Right.
And that included in his diagnosis as having some kind of psychological episode, and that one put him in a hospital for quite a while.
Right. But he was maybe seeing things. If he had that orb episode, he actually may have had some kind of experience as well. I'm just asking Richard about this because that's been the most controversial case that people know Richard Doty for. So I just wanted to get the record straight on his side of that story. Now I'm going to go into what he knows about the actual disclosure on the government ends.